Insane in the Membrane.
Hello and welcome to another edition of your favourite podcast, Insane in the Membrane, with me, Rich Wilson. And this week I'm joined by the brilliant Benji Waterstones. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, good to see you. Where in the world do we find you?
In my teeny flat in Brick Lane, yeah.
Nice. No,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
anyone living in London's got... I don't know anyone that's got a vast amount of space at the minute.
Well, yeah. Ours is literally a two-car garage in size, 400 square feet. So I've just had to kick my partner out. Whenever one of us has a meeting, we have to kick the other into the park, basically.
Yeah. I have that as well. We've just moved to a place in Worthing, and it's lovely, but it's small. And like she works from home during the day, so yeah. If I'm recording, I have to go and stand in the kitchen or something, which is more of a galley, really.
Mate, we've got that. And as well, when like in lockdown, like we'd continue having our therapy on Zoom, but the other you'd just be having it in one room. You'd be telling your therapist about an argument, and through the other room, you just hear my partner going, "It wasn't like that." You just hear every word of the thing. Yeah.
I know. I forgot. I did therapy via Zoom as well, and in between the lockdowns, and my flatmate Sweeney used to have to go and ride his bike, or I'd make sure he was at work at least. Not that I had anything to say about him. It's just that there's some personal stuff in there, and yeah. This is what we have to do, isn't it? The modern times we live in now, we're doing therapy via computer screens.
I know. It's funny though, because in that people really relax that kind of working from home model. I think because my therapist at one point, he was giving me therapy while he was driving.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So everyone got a bit more relaxed with the working from home, didn't they?
Yeah. I liked it though. I after the first sort of few minutes when I got into it, I actually quite liked it. I didn't feel, because there's always when I've had therapy before, and you go to their practice or wherever they're doing it, and it's a bit daunting to go to a strange place. But doing it via Zoom, actually, once I got used to talking, via the camera, it actually felt all right. And then when you're finished, you haven't got to get the bus home. You're already there.
Yeah. No, there is that.
Yeah. So how are you doing anyway? You well?
I'm not too bad. Yeah. I'm having I've just handed in this book I've been writing on Monday, so that's good. That's quite a big landmark for me, I guess. And I'm my work life is quite relatively chilled at the minute, because I'm just like locuming, which means you can pick and choose how much you work as a doctor, which is kind of nice for when you've got big deadlines and stuff. So, all's good with me, really. I've just got I say that. I've just opened my emails. Life's good until you open your emails, I think, sometimes, isn't it? Like, I used to do that. I used to just, not put my phone on until, 1 o'clock, and then I'd have a whole morning of, getting some nice writing done. And then you put your phone on, the problem sort of starts. I opened my emails this morning. I've just got the latest family member who's unhappy with, my book and won't sign a consent form, and it's just, it's a bit of a nightmare, yeah.
Oh shit!
But that's the difficulty, isn't it? When you do try to talk about these things, not everyone's on board with that,
No, I think, especially when it's if they don't want to admit maybe their behaviour was a bit questionable, or whatever it is. It's a bit too personal for them, or because I know I've had conversations with close family members about things that happened when I was a kid. And they're in complete denial. They kind of the way they talk. It's like, I'm like, what is this life that you lived then? Because that's not how I remembered it.
Yeah, totally.
And if I was to mention it in a book or on stage, I imagine they'd raise their hand and go, "Hang on a minute, that's not what we did." And I'm like, "Why?"
Well, totally.
Yeah, difficult.
Difficult. And there is no real objective truth with these things, is there? There's just everyone's got a different version of their story of how it really was. And also I do feel sorry for my family on one level, because I'm just from that generation that is maybe a little bit irritating, like oversharing, perhaps. You know, we're trying to do things a different way, aren't we? Instead of brushing stuff under carpets and pretending it didn't happen, which was the old-fashioned approach. We're being encouraged to do things a bit differently, but not everyone's quite on board with that idea yet, you know.
I know. I think, we're the first sort of generation that maybe like you said, oversharing. But what will happen is, with all these things, as you know, there's this massive overcorrection until it comes back to kind of middle ground, more. Everybody's more at ease with it all, rather than we're all going, this happened, and everyone's like, whoa, all right, mate, I just asked you if you wanted a cup of tea.
Yeah. No, totally. Society's like that, isn't it? It just swings from never talking, pull your socks up, stiff upper lip, to then, like, I guess, you know, the Prince Harry model of, like, bearing everything to the world in a book, and then everyone's like, well, hold on a second, that's too much. I guess you've got to find that healthy balance, yeah.
Well, especially with the life he's led, I mean, you know, the awfulness that he's had to deal with, and now he's finding the space to talk about it, going, look, this is what, but because he comes from a privileged background, people are like, well, so what? You haven't got anything to worry about. You go, no, his mum was killed. That's something you're never going to get over, regardless of your background and your privilege. That's still a horrible thing to have gone through as a child. You know?
Yeah, no, totally. We need to get over this idea that people with material wealth can never have any pain, you know, or still not have a shit life. It must have been a very weird existence for him, mustn't it? Like being told he was this spare and like, what is his purpose in life, really? You know? Yeah. Yeah, it must have been a weird one.
Yeah. I've heard through doing gigs for the troops and that years ago, I heard that he was a top boy. Like, you know, he's made mistakes, but fundamentally, he's a lovely lad, from what I can gather. Right. Which blows my mind with the amount of hatred that him and his missus get. You know, and it's just, but that's what happens when you're in the public eye. People just download all their bullshit from other places, and because you see some of it and you go, what the fuck? What is this? What is this? Yeah, just leave them alone. Let them get on with it. They're not these. She's not evil. He's not evil. What are you doing? It just baffles me. I suppose that's just human nature with a lot of people, isn't it? It's just how we are. Yeah.
And I guess like people might think, oh, it's not the right way. The way he's gone about it is not very kind of respectful or proper or decent or whatever it is. But like, this is what I had with my family. It's like, we've got this culture in my family, a similar sort of thing of like, a bit like what you were saying your family is, I guess the modern phrase is like gaslighting, like telling you your memories are wrong, or this wasn't really like that and everything's fine. And then when you do try and talk about it, and then like I've kind of written this thing or done comedy about it or had therapy about it to try and make sense of it. And that's been, arguably slightly selfish on my part. It's been more for me, you know, like working through it all. Yeah. And then now, like, my family are like, why does the world have to know? Why couldn't we have just spoke about this? It's like, well, I've been trying to speak to you about it my whole life. So it's a bit late now when it's about to go to the printers, you know?
Yeah. This is it. I have discovered as well, through being more open and talking about things, I've actually realised the other side of it as well. I was a bit ungrateful as well. There were some things that were done for me and on my behalf that I didn't take into account when I was growing up. And now I look back and I go, actually no, that was me who was a prick at that point. You know, there's stuff like I always talk about the school that I went to. I'm like, it was okay, but it wasn't a great school. There wasn't any talk of further education. Wasn't any talk about this, that, and the other. You just went to school, and I suddenly remembered recently. I'm like, but my parents didn't want me to go to that school. They wanted me to go somewhere else, and they had plans, and they were like, right, we want to put him in this school because it's the numbers are better and there's better facilities and this and that. But because I wanted to be with my mates, I insisted. I went, no, I want to go to this school, and I suddenly went, fuck yeah, that was my fault.
Yeah, you can't blame your parents for everything, can you? Obviously,
no.
As tempting as that is. But I'm not even doing that though. That's the thing. Like, I like to think I'm taking my own responsibility for my own, unhappiness and shit or whatever it is, and also acknowledging the great, very good positive things about my family as well. But it's just, I think, also helpful to acknowledge the things that you want to try and do differently in the next generation, but they don't even want to hear about that.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
No, I know. And now I think back, and it's kind of like, on balance, you kind of go, all right, yeah, there was some shit things happened. I did some shit things, and you kind of go, you can't drag that around forever. The things that happened weren't catastrophic. They were just things that had happened and caused a bit of upset mentally here and there. But on the whole, could have been worse, wasn't. So I think out of all of this now, all the therapy I've had and all the chatting and that I've done, I'm like, yeah, okay, let's all of us move forward in a different direction to that. That's what I've taken from it. What I enjoyed about I read the beginning of your book, and I loved the story. I don't want to spoil it with the story that like, is there a doctor on board? And you're like, yeah, and you go piling down, and then there's a guy already there, and he's trying to resuscitate this person in the aisle on the plane, and he looks, he's like, what sort of a doctor are you? And that's never happened in any film I've ever seen.
Yeah, just my life. Yeah, and then I tell him I'm a psychiatrist, and then he says, right, well, if I manage to restart his heart, then you can ask him about his childhood.
Which was such a great opening. That doesn't spoil anything for anybody. Hopefully, that's made people intrigued, and they go, "Oh, I need to read this," because straight away I was engaged, and straight away I'm like, "Oh, this is going to be excellent."
Thanks, Rich. Thank you.
Did you find that though? Like you say, like, because you are a doctor, and do you find that people, like you said, people don't take mental health issues. They don't see them in the same way as physical, it comes up all the time. Like if you had a broken leg or a pain in the knee or something, you'd go and get it looked at, you'd go and get it sorted out. But when you've got a pain in your brain, you don't tend to rush to seek help, which is fascinating, I find.
Yeah. Well, psychiatrists, they are medical doctors who did go through medical school and then had to learn how to treat the body before the mind. But even now, they do have a slightly uncomfortable position at the medical table, because these things that we call mental illnesses are very different from like the diseases that you have in other branches of medicine. So like that's why psychiatrists will always be ridiculed by our colleagues in other specialities as like not proper doctors and like just social workers with stethoscopes and all these slurs that they say about us, which is very valid, because like as much as we use this jargon and we like to make out that because we now have names for things, they are established things, we are still very much in the Stone Ages of really understanding any of these mysterious things we call mental illnesses, because in medicine, for example, like that bloke who was doing the CPR, who was like a general medical doctor, like usually you have a known cause for a disease, like that's called the etiology, and you'll have the known disease process, which is called the pathology, and then you'll have a treatment as well, which is usually you'll be able to aim treatments and preventions based on those bits of information. But in mental health, we don't even know what causes these things. We don't know what they are, and our treatments are really limited. So that's kind of why we are so low down in the hierarchy, in people's kind of, in the reputation, because psychiatrists have always been kind of ridiculed as, like back in the day when they just used to throw people in asylums and lock the door basically, and everyone was just called mad. There were no real other words than that. People used to say that like psychiatry was just like, that psychiatric hospitals or asylums were just like museums for the mad, because no one ever really came out. There was no movement there. And then like we were supposedly like enlightened when we developed some drugs in the 50s, and that led to the emptying of the asylums and people started being medicated and stuff. But even now, like, people are realizing that that wasn't the penicillin moment that everyone thought it was, because there are real limitations to these treatments too. And we're still kind of very, And in other areas of medicine as well, like you see like outcomes and advancements are continuing to improve. Whereas psychiatry is the only medical specialty where they're not only not improving on lots of measures, the outcomes are getting worse. So
yeah, right.
It's kind of like, well, how clever is what we're doing really, and how helpful is what we're doing really, and that's a conflict that I sometimes have felt in my job, you know.
Yeah. But it's funny with the brain. Even through doing this podcast over the last 4 years, I've learned so much from talking to people like you, and you know, you realise that there's so many layers that are yet unexplored within the human consciousness and everything that's going on. It's like the ocean. It's like there's still untapped places that people just can't get to, and you know, because you know, you answer one question, but then with another question, you're like, well, why though? But why is that? Why do you have these weird thoughts? Why do you go off? Why does one thing set you off on a path doing so? And you know, I find it fascinating, and it at the same time I find it frightening, because it's almost like you're never gonna know. Like, why are we here in the first place? Like, you're never gonna know.
There you go.
Freaks me out of it.
But it's funny because a few times you've used the word brain, and that's funny because that's the way that we've conceptualized this human suffering most recently. We've put it through this medical paradigm, this language like brain defects and chemical imbalances, which there's still no actual evidence for any of that. You might have heard quite recently, like psychiatrists have only recently admitted, there is no evidence for this chemical imbalance theory of depression, for example, which you remember was this whole idea that's been pushed on the public, and like 90% of the general public think that depression is caused by low serotonin, but there's no evidence for any of that actually.
Yeah.
And it's like, with how we conceptualize these things has always changed. If you look at the history of psychiatry, like, it used to be, people thought of it in terms of like, in the ancient world, it was like divine intervention. It was kind of God and evil and demons and things. And then after that, it was like in the Middle Ages, it was all witches and you know, all that sort of stuff. And then only now, there's been loads more since then, but then now we've had this medical explanation. But then how appropriate that is and how helpful that is, I think people are starting to wonder, are these really, are they really the same as physical diseases? Or do we need a better way to conceptualize them? Yeah. Because it does seem to me like not right. Like, I see this a lot in my life, you know, people with like shitty lives, basically, with crap lives. And then we tell them, you feel low and hopeless and like life's not worth living just because you got low serotonin. Like, rather than being mindful of the social drivers for their misery, which are much more, feel to me like much, would be a better thing to look into, probably.
Definitely. I mean, it's like with what we do with comedy and stuff, and people are always saying, you know, you've just got to keep pushing, you know, you can achieve so much if you just keep pushing. But if your skin or whatever else is going on in your life, you don't feel motivated. You don't feel, if you're living on a shitty estate somewhere, you don't feel motivated a lot of the time to do things. What you're doing is surviving. And that just saps all your energy, and it's very difficult to. People go, well, you can be anything you want. You can improve your life. You just got to pull your socks up and get out there and do it. And you go, but if you have no money coming in, or you've got a family to support and whatever, and you're living on some shitty estate that the council don't even bother with, it's difficult to dig deep, isn't it? You know, and you just get left.
Definitely. I think that is, it's borderline shameful, really, because that is what happens. Like, these things, like depression, like all mental illnesses, cling disproportionately to poverty. They affect people more, like the people you've just described, like that, I don't know, single mum living in crappy housing with no social support, no prospects, no education, no hope, no purpose, no nothing. And then when psychiatrists just say, just take this, love, it's just your brain chemistry, you'll feel better. It's kind of like, that's missing the far bigger picture. Which which thankfully people are starting to, I think, be a little bit suspicious of these messages that they've been pushed about brain chemistry and blah, blah, blah. And that's obviously come from loads of places, including the pharmaceutical industry, because obviously that's quite convenient for them to push their serotonin-related medicines. But now people are wising up to how marginal those benefits are anyway, and the jury's still out about whether they're anything more than active placebos anyway. Like, people are starting to look more into social prescribing, for example, or like looking to say, hang on, could we maybe change the way society is arranged instead of just medicating everyone?
Yes.
But that's a bigger task. That's a bigger task, obviously.
Yeah. Well, it's the people in charge of everything that basically, if you can contribute to society that makes them more money, basically, if the people in charge, you're benefiting them, if you can contribute to that, then you're seen as valued and valid, and they'll help you, or they'll there's a place for you. But if you're just someone who doesn't have these opportunities or isn't part of that, you just get left. They go, no, they happily just, on a small level with the kids' school dinners, people, they actively went out of their way to vote against feeding children. And you go, if you fed these people, if you looked after them, they'd be more inclined to be part of society, which would then benefit everybody. And it's such a simple thing, but they never see that. They're just interested in having all the money and all the power, and if you contribute to that, then you're part of us. But if not, you can get fucked. And it's on that basic level. And I might be wrong, but that's what it seems like to me. And I'm not an educated man.
Well, yeah, I think this is society is so individualistic now, which is a shame. I think people say it was all like, you remember, what was it? Thatcher said there's no such thing as society and all of that stuff. And it's like, we do seem to be more self-serving and looking out for ourselves, which I think explains, stuff like that, which is obviously really sad, because the thing is as well, that self-serving, materialistic, that's the trap of materialism, because ultimately it's empty anyway. When you get all that stuff for yourself, I sense, not that I've had it all, but like, I know people who are very rich and they feel as empty as anyone. So it's like, we're caught in this hamster wheel of chasing the thing that's actually probably not going to fulfill us ultimately anyway, which is Yeah.
Oh, on a tiny level, I remember up until very recently, I used to love going out shopping. Even though I didn't have any money, I always used to get a hit from getting something new. I was like, I need to go and get something new, or I'd order something online, or I'd do this. And then we've just moved to this smaller flat in Worthing, so we haven't got any storage space. So we're now just selling stuff, giving stuff away. And I'm like, oh my God, this is all stuff I bought when I was going through that phase of I need new things. And now I'm like, none of this means anything. I'm actually happier without it. It's not clogging up my brain having to worry about where I'm going to put it all. Someone else has now benefited from the fact that I've just, have this because I'm not using it. And, we do get caught up in that kind of, more things will make me more happy. And you go, actually, fewer things, and focusing on, your loved ones and whoever, yourself a bit, mentally and physically looking after yourself is so much more important. And it's taken me 51 years to realise that. Yeah. No, I totally. But that's what we're sold, isn't it? That's how we're seduced through like marketing and everything. That we just need this thing. I always remember my mum always used to say all she needed to be happy was this VW Beetle, and she was always talking about that. All I need to be happy is a VW Beetle, and she saved and saved and saved and saved, and then she got one, and then within like a few weeks, I've written about it in the book, but like a few weeks, like she was like, back to wanting to kill herself and stuff, and it's like. Yeah, of course it wasn't about of course you weren't just missing a VW Beetle in your life. That wasn't the one thing that you were missing, And I think that's the other thing. It is an interesting critique of therapy, which is very inward looking, very introspective.
And, you know, as you say, like, you can overthink stuff. And like, if you're living in the past or kind of living in these stories, how happy is that making you? And some people at the other extreme actually say that actually looking outside of yourself through, say, volunteering or altruism, doing stuff for others, interestingly, is a really good way to make you happier as well.
Absolutely,
Yeah, that's something I've noticed through my work, because when I was just taking time out, I was like really stressed at work, because like NHS psychiatry can be quite difficult. And and then I took the break, and my fantasy was, oh, life's going to be all great and this, that, and the other. But actually, I felt like I forgot it was giving me a lot. Just that thing of, at least, if not helping people, at least trying to help people did do something for me. It did nourish me in some way.
Yeah. It's funny on a very sort of base level. I remember I've given people, you know, like you give people change or give people, say, or, you know, somebody, or you buy something to eat or whatever. And I was always in my head, I was like, oh, this is good karma. This will come back. And then and then up until recently, I was like, actually, just do it. You should just be doing it on that level. It's just like, I want to help this person without getting anything back, without any sort of karma thing. And it's like, I just want to, at the end of the day, I don't want this person. The other day there was someone, he was rummaging in the bin. And I just went, and he looked, because there's the other thing as well, you think people have been a bit dodgy, and I know there's a lot of scammers out there. But this guy was in the bin, and he drinking and eating out his thing. I was like, mate, no, have this. And it was literally that. It wasn't like, oh, this is going to come back to me tenfold. It was just, I don't want you eating out of the bin, mate. That's fucking...
Yeah.
That's the worst. And so but it takes a lot to get to that point where you go, I'm just doing it because I want to help someone, rather than I'm doing this so I get something back. It takes a lot.
It does. I mean, it is hard to lose the ego, though, isn't it? Or even when you're trying to do something right. Yeah, I had a thing where there was a guy it was in Brighton. I mean, this is such a Brighton story, but he was like recycling his cider cans. He was like a homeless guy recycling his cider cans, and I thought, oh, good on you, you know. And and then he said, you got any change? And I said, oh, not really, mate, but I'll get you some food. I'll get you some food from the shop if you want. And he's like, all right, a meal deal, and can I get a scratch card? And I got him that. And then he was scratching it, and then he was just, as he was scratching, I was saying, fucking, do you know what? I could do with 100 grand as well, you know? Like, if this comes in, what is the arrangement here? Are we going to halve this, or?
That's it, but then yeah, I've said that. I've been like, oh, yeah, but yeah, if that comes in, that's what, I've thought about that before. I'll go off, and then it'll be in the news, homeless man wins $1 million.
Yeah.
And you can't be a prick about it. You got to go. Oh, you know what? Good on him. That was a bit of luck that day. Well done. Yeah. But I liked also when I was reading that you were explaining the difference between psychologists, psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, psychic. Because that's you were right in what you were saying. Media and you know, TV and things like that have really kind of, it's very difficult to know what the differences are.
Yeah, I suppose. I guess the main psychiatrist that's been in the public consciousness or through kind of popular culture is Hannibal Lecter. He's the most famous psychiatrist. That cannibalistic serial killer who also, surprise, surprise, was a psychiatrist. And so there's not been many good object, not really portrayed in a great way. But that's probably because psychiatrists do have these very unusual, well, as we've said, mental illness is very mysterious and unknown, and people fear that, right? But also on top of that, psychiatrists have unusual powers, you know. It's kind of, you know, it still doesn't sit easily with me that I have the power to take someone into hospital against their will, you know, to section them.
Wow.
To kind of, to go against all their usual human rights to liberty and to autonomy and to decide what powerful medicines go through their veins. All of that psychiatrists can override, you know, and I think people understandably fear that because that is a slightly problematic thing, you know. So that's why we usually paint it in very bad light in kind of Batman comics and, you know, like
yes,
yeah. And then the more kind of palatable end, which isn't psychiatry at all, but most people think is psychiatry, is like the Woody Allen kind of image of someone in a Manhattan sort of therapy room lying on a couch talking about their mum, and that's psychoanalysis. That's like difficult. Right. That's therapy, psychoanalysis, and then So people get very confused about the difference.
Yeah,
but
so
I think psychiatrists generally are more meds. Psychiatrists are medical doctors, and they have these powers to section people and also to prescribe medications. Whereas psychologists and psychotherapists and psychoanalysts, their treatment comes through words. Yeah.
Right, and so kind of like unpacking everything that's going on, rather than sort of like summarising it all and going, right, this person's going to need this medication. Exactly.
Psychiatry is mainly just about symptom suppression. So it's like, okay, you're hearing voices, you're having unusual delusional ideas that, I don't know, your neighbour wants to kill you or whatever. Then a psychiatrist will be like, oh, that sounds a bit like what we call schizophrenia. I'll give you this antipsychotic and that'll hopefully reduce those symptoms. Whereas psychotherapists and psychologists and psychoanalysts would be a bit more thoughtful about it. They'd be like, "Ooh, can we make any sense of this? What are the voices telling you?
Yeah,
might there be some meaning to this? Why the neighbour? What's the history there? Blah blah blah." So they're just a bit more thoughtful than psychiatrists that don't think in quite those ways.
Yeah, I think. Going back to what you were saying about villains in movies and things like that, I think there's something about the most sinister villains in these things are ones that are like, it was the first time it was sort of, whereas before, you know, growing up, the bad guy was just this thug that just wanted to take over the world or whatever, and then it started to be, there was a few that were like, they were hyper intelligent. And they understood the human mind. They understood humanity better than anybody else. And someone like Hannibal Lecter understood on an animalistic level as well. You know, tapping into the animal side of his psyche. Do you know what I mean? And that sort of made it more like, fuck, I wouldn't want to fuck around with that guy. You know, a big dude that is going to come in and punch your head in. You kind of go, I know what that guy's about, and I know what to expect. But to fuck about on a psychological level, that's so much more sinister.
Yeah. I think because, you know, we are more scared of losing our minds than anything, I think, aren't we? And of potentially ending up in these spaces. You know, people are more fearful. It's kind of weird when people are more fearful of like psychiatric hospitals than they are prisons, you know, when you get people like malingering, which is like pretending. It doesn't happen an awful lot, but where you get people pretending to be mad so that they can go to a psychiatric hospital instead of prison.
Wow. Yeah. And it's funny that, isn't it, when people study how to be a certain way to get out of trouble or make their punishment less, they think, but they forget that if you've got one of these things, you're not going to have all of the symptoms. You know, you're going to have bits and bobs. It's a bit more fluid than that. But someone who comes in like textbook, they've got this, they're hearing voices, they're doing this, they're doing that. And then you can kind of go, yeah, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah, but even then, and what I was going to say about that is some people have this idea that it's going to be cushy in psychiatric hospitals, but at least in prison, like, you have an end date and you know when you're coming out.
Oh shit, yeah.
And also you can decide you can decide if you can have treatments or not. But if you've seen that, I mean, I guess the best example of like malingering gone wrong was in that film One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest, where he do you remember he's like trying to escape that charge, and then the next thing he knows, he ends up like a human vegetable after having a lobotomy, basically. So that was a bit of a backfire. But that's a good point about when people. But even then, this is the headfuck of psychiatry. It's like you think you have a hunch. So sometimes I have this scenario where I will see people who it seems a little bit fishy. It's like, oh, are they trying too hard to seem mad, or are they like, is it a bit too textbook? Are they using medical jargon? Does the story really fit with, say, like a true schizophrenia sort of picture? And so I'll have to make this really awkward, uncomfortable decision of saying, well, I actually think they're trying it on, which means they'll go down the criminal justice system and go to prison. But even then, I can never be 100% because there's no head scan for schizophrenia. There's no blood test for depression. It's still just this grey world. So you never really know. It's just on you, and you just have to live with that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's why you need to hold these ideas of diagnosis so lightly, because, you know, especially in comedy nowadays, when everyone's identifying as having this, that, or the other, and they say my this or my that, and it's like, well, hold on a second. You sound unduly certain about these things, because don't forget that having a diagnosis, all that means is that some person in a room with you one time said they think you've maybe matched the diagnostic criteria for this thing, you know?
Yes.
That's really not set in stone. And if you meet 10 different psychiatrists and say the same thing, you could leave with as many different diagnoses. So...
yeah. I know what you mean. It's one of those, especially in comedy at the minute, everybody wants to be diagnosed with something weirdly. And you're kind of like, you just, you know, hold fire. Just, you know, I mean, there are people that have got, I've said this before on here, and I'm not knocking anybody, but there are people that have got, you know, hugely debilitating levels of ADHD and autism and anything else that's happening, that they're only now just kind of like discovering that they have, and now they're getting some kind of peace. They go, oh, well, that makes sense now. That's why my entire life has been so tricky, because I've been trying to be forced into this position of this, but I'm not actually that. This other stuff's been going on. But then there are other people that you can see it, and they're kind of trying to cling on to something because they want to be a part of the noise, and you're like, just you don't need to. If you haven't got it, don't try and find it. You know,
but yeah.
I don't know. It'll be another. Again, it's that massive overcorrection where yes, we just should all be talking about it, and then it'll kind of level out again when everyone, you know, we all talk about something else. Maybe, I don't know.
I think so.
Sound like not, you know, yeah. Go on.
Yeah. No, I think so, because having that identity and having that label explain all the problems you have in your life is probably only going to last for so long, you know. I think as you often see, people, the moment they get their diagnosis, a lot of the time, as you say, it's that sense of relief. An explanation for why life has been so hard from someone in a white coat. This all makes perfect sense. But then as life goes on, a lot of the time, and they realize that's really a little bit overly simplistic and reductive, you know, and actually it probably doesn't explain away everything. And also like ADHD has become, I mean, it's so overly diagnosed now, it's almost become like meaningless in what it even means, hasn't it? Like if you've ever done one of those like ADHD screening tools, which I have, and then at the end it says, oh, I have symptoms consistent with ADHD and to go seek medical advice. And it's like, well, I really don't think, I mean, yeah, I'm sometimes restless and distractible and impulsive, but it's like I feel like that's more a symptom of like living in this hyper-connected digital 21st century world when I have a mobile phone and every company is vying for my attention, more than like a brain defect, you know. And and I'm sure there's quite a bit of that going on, and I think people again are being suspicious of, like, I don't know if you saw that Panorama documentary on ADHD. Did you see that?
No.
It's about like, people, how this is another thing that often happens, and like people will say to me, like, if you will say, it's a very, as you say, it's a very weird thing where when I used to work in general medicine, it would usually be like really great news. I'd say, hey Rich, great news, I don't think you've got this illness, like I think you're okay, and you'd like be pleased with that. But at the milder end of things, with these more desirable labels like ADHD or autism or whatever the thing is, whatever's in vogue at that time, I then would say that to patients sometimes, and hey, the good news is, Rich, I don't think you've got this, that, or the other. and they'd be kind of like furious, you know,
right?
As you say, like wanting it. And so then they'd go away and they'd come back to me and say, oh, well, you know, you missed my diagnosis. I went private and they've discovered my diagnosis. Like it's this objective truth. But then if you watch this ADHD diagnosis, you just see what nonsense it is, where it's just like you pay $1,000, someone will see you on Zoom, ask you if you get bored queuing in a post office, ask you if you're on your phone too much, ask you if you have 20 tabs open on your internet at any one time. Basically just asking you questions that all human beings do anyway. Then they'll give you a diagnosis and send you on your way, and then you'll be paying expensive prescriptions with them for the rest of your life. So I think people watching that were like, oh, this is it's a very limited model that we have of the current classification system for mental illness is really limited, basically. Yeah.
And there's people I know that, there's a friend of mine, and she's for years, and she lives in Scotland, and we chat all the time. But she was telling me that, and she struggled her whole life with ADHD, and not knowing that that's what it was. You know, she's had, higher pressure jobs, high profile jobs, and she always felt like she couldn't quite. She was all like, "What? I should be able to just get on with this and do that and the other." And then when she finally got the diagnosis, she's like, "Fuck yeah! Now it all makes sense, and that's amazing. That's it, yeah." But then, like you say, that the milder end, when you say, I see it now, and people are just like, "Oh, I forget this or I do that," and I'm like, "Yeah, I do that." Like you said, we all do that, And more often than not, if you're in the arts, you probably do have some kind of ADHD or something like that, which is why you're on that side of things in the first place. Because if you didn't, you may be working in an office and a bit more regimented, and you'd quite like that. I'm not saying people that work in offices don't have this ADHD, but there seems to be people more in the arts seem to have more of it, rather than people that, 9 to 5, happy with doing that. They got their rituals and their bits and bobs, and I mean, of course, it's a sweeping statement, and I'm dealing with, I'm not saying everybody, but that's what it seems to be. I think if you're in the arts, you've probably got it.
I think the way I think about it is, if it's helpful for you to give these things a name, these behaviours a name, and that serves you well then that's not really hurting anyone, I guess, so fair enough. But some people actually find, in my experience with other labels like schizophrenia or bipolar, at the more serious end, actually having that label can be as bad as having the thing itself, like the way that society will like ostracize you and fear you and ignore you and not involve you, for example. So I'm kind of wary of using labels unless you really need to. And I guess the only thing that slightly feels unjust to me in the whole ADHD thing is how in the mental health conversation, it is generally high functioning people with mild, if any, issues, and often just it's mainly armchair self-diagnoses a lot of the time, isn't it, really, that are kind of dominating this whole mental health conversation. And the problem with that is that it just really waters down what it actually means to have a debilitating, disabling mental illness. And people who actually have those, people think, oh, what are you making such a fuss? Like, they think they just get even more lost, they just get even more left behind, and they get even less of a voice, and they get even less of the resources, that there aren't even enough going as it is. If there were endless resources that we could, send a psychiatrist and a psychologist and blah, blah, blah to everyone who thought they were a little bit distractible or whatever, fine. But given how much mental health funding has been cut, and we can't even help the people at the severe end of things. Like, until then, my priority is really just going to be trying to give those guys a bit more of a voice, Yeah.
Because as you say, as we talked about earlier, if you're not contributing, then society just kind of goes, you're not necessary then. We're just going to ignore you and focus on the people that can contribute to this. And there's many people that just get, like you say, that just get left, and you just don't have the resources. And it breaks my heart that there are people that just think that they're worthless because of that.
It's shocking, and that's what I sometimes, that's what I've had to catch myself. my speciality, I guess the main people that I work with is people with more serious mental illness, like schizophrenia, and people, and so those are people who hear voices and have delusional ideas. And because of unhelpful ideas that have been pushed through the media, sensationalist, news reporting or films or whatever it is, people have this really over exaggerated idea about the risk that such people pose, when you see those front pages on the rare occasion that someone chops someone's head off or does something quite bizarre, and so that means that unfortunately all people with that diagnosis now, people are so wary of them, they want them to be medicated on the off chance that they maybe do something horrendous, even though most of them never will, and they're much more likely to be victims of violence. And like booze and drugs are much bigger risk factors for violence than having schizophrenia. But no one seems to care about going to parties, and it's like, but the cost of that to those people with that diagnosis, society, people like me, we just have to medicate them. And sometimes I would see a patient with a diagnosis like that, and they'd be on medication, and they'd just be sitting in their house watching TV and eating takeaways and sleeping 18 hours a day, but not causing anyone any bother, like just zombies basically. And I'd be writing in the notes, patient doing well, just existing, and I'd be sometimes writing patient doing well, see review in 6 months or whatever. And then I'd catch myself being like, in what world is this doing well? Yeah, he's not posing a particular risk to anyone, but as you say, like, there's a difference between being alive and living, and like, we should demand we need a better arrangement than that, than just medicating people. So they're essentially still are in asylums, really, but they're just in chemical chains, they're just out of sight and out of mind. They're just living in their houses where no one can see them.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's always, so when people do hear voices, is there, now I know this is a clunky, stupid way of asking it. I don't really know how else to say, but it always seems to be that they're always negative voices that not necessarily say kill your neighbour, but they always seem to be arguing with somebody, or there's always a friction, and it's never like, I've just been hanging out with my mate, and you're going to go, oh, okay. But it's always, is there a reason for that? Is it because humans sort of err on the side of negativity, or is it just, this is something I've always wanted to know. I don't really know,
No, it's a good question. To be honest, they're not always negative. I think how psychiatrists talk about it is it would be kind of like the voices are usually congruent with the mood. So like if, for example, in paranoid schizophrenia, that's where let's use that neighbour wants to kill you example. That'll be the delusional idea. So the voice, which is quite a persecutory, negative idea. And so the voices will be in keeping with that. But then, for example, in mania, which is where you get in more bipolar, when people are kind of going up and having a manic episode, when they'll actually be like 10 out of 10 happy, walking on cloud 9, like basically, like when it is when people are high on drugs, basically, but just all of the time.
Oh, like Richard Hardesty.
Just like your boy Rich, exactly. And then the voices then will be kind of like in keeping with that. They'll be like, oh, Rich, you are Superman, or you are, how he has all of that. You're Superman, or you're God, you're Jesus. So the mood, they're not always negative. They're in keeping with the mood. Yeah, but Rich is a good friend of mine, and like, he's a kind of, he again is another example of the limitations of these classification systems, because he's been labelled with everything. So has he got everything, or has he got nothing, or is he just a complicated, boy with a traumatic early life, He told me they've just diagnosed him with ADHD. It's like, how is a diagnosis of ADHD going to help him now when he's already got borderline, anorexia, bipolar? Take your pick.
I know, and having spent time with him, so I sort of met him through a mutual friend of my wife's, and a friend of my wife's, and she was friends with Rich. And I remember we got to Edinburgh last year, and then she was like, "You have to go and see this show. Richard is brilliant." And I'd never heard of him before, and I'm like, yeah, I'll check that out. And as you know, I saw you like 3 times. I'm like, I can't get enough of this show. And then having spent
incredible
time with him, oh man, it was so emotional. I cried every time. And I did again when I supported him on tour, and having spent some time with him in the car and just hanging around with him, and you see that he's not trying to. He's almost trying to suppress himself. He's trying to sit on his hands, because you can see he's like, he has to do certain things a certain way, otherwise he feels like he's just going to just explode and lose it at some point. You know, it just felt like he was, rather than trying to express himself, he was trying not to, almost, which was something I hadn't seen before.
Right. Yeah, no, he's a special guy, Rich, and I guess that's the other thing. It's like he's got a really great psychiatrist who I actually know, who's kind of more of the school of more kind of. I think we think in a similar sort of way. Like, he doesn't just want to suppress symptoms, because actually, as we've said, Rich is a special guy, and other people that have picked up diagnoses like that could be living the life that they could be those guys sitting in their a flat share, sleeping 18 hours a day, drooling, overweight from all these antipsychotics they're on, just not causing anyone bother, not really getting to live. Whereas Rich is like really alive and really living, and
inspirational.
And I think that's a much better thing to promote, definitely, rather than to sedate him and seduce him. Than to sedate him and bring him all down. You know, as long as he's not causing anyone any bother, which he isn't generally, apart from. Yeah, when he has a little wobble or whatever. But that's when I came in to support him when he had one of those wobbles. That's why I was always at the Pleasance, to try and just keep him chilled and everything. And then the rest of his run was great.
Yeah. And and I think that's what needs to happen. I think, like you said before, society needs to get a more rather than changing these people. Society needs to change so we can accommodate them and understand them. Or exactly what you said earlier, having been around Rich, like we said, and you do this. He talks to you and he goes, right. He goes, is this in place? Is that in place? And you go, yeah, no, it's all good, man. It's all good. And that's what we as a society needs to be. But as you say, we're also sort of single-minded and focusing on ourselves rather than people around us. It's hopefully we're sort of like the first wave, maybe. And change will come in future generations. I don't know. But that's what needs to happen. People,
again, think they want to talk about mental health, but again, it's at the super mild end of things. And we really need to...
Definitely, that is just,
the mild end of things, which is arguably not even mental health, which is arguably just problems of living, the everyday pain of being a human being a lot of the time. And we're just over-medicalising everyday life a lot of the time. Yeah. That's the sort of stuff that people seem to want to talk about. But when you actually get some challenging, real stuff, it's a bit much for people.
Yeah. There was this the other week, there was somebody, someone messaged in a WhatsApp group and said, do you know this guy? And we all kind of went, yeah, I sort of know him, yeah. They went, well, I think he's on the edge. I think he needs talking down. So everyone jumped on it. We were sort of privately messaging him and trying to get hold of him. But you could see people, like you said, people are all right talking about it like this. Or let's talk about mental health. But when something actually happens, it's interesting to see how few people get involved. Actually, I've said to people before, I'm like, look, drop me a message if you like, if you're feeling it. And some people have. And we've had a bit of a back and forth, and then every now and again, you kind of go, I can't, I haven't replied to that person because life gets in the way or whatever. But yeah, you'd be surprised how many people don't want to get involved when it's actually happening. They're all right talking about it, like you say with Rich. If he's had a moment, and people, like you say, if it's not neatly packaged, and we're dealing with mental health because we've got this show on our books, and then when it's like, I think not just Rich, but other people just kind of go, something's happening here, and they're like, oh no, we haven't got the facilities for that. Take him away. Go and take him around the block for a walk. We need to be more. We need to have more of an understanding, don't we? Really, of how to cope on both sides when people are actively, physically openly struggling.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I think that's definitely right. And it's not unfair to kind of like, it's not that people are unkind or cruel or anything. I think they just don't have the experience. Whereas, like, for example, me hanging around Rich, like I mean, that's my, Rich is still at the mild end of things compared to my day job, you know. So I find that all very tolerable and very easy. But to people who haven't been exposed to quite extreme levels of mental illness, it's sort of, I get why they might not go towards that, and if anything, go away from it.
Yeah, as you say, it's like with the way people like that are portrayed in films and TV. You know, it's people they don't really know, so they are scared to engage with these people. They kind of it's that, isn't it? It's fear. That's the thing that stops us doing anything, isn't it? On any level, it's the fear of something. It's like, I'd rather not get involved with that because I don't understand it. You know, I don't get it. I don't know what's going to happen. I can't deal with that. So this is what we need to do. It's like you say, try and change the framework that we're in. So we've all got a better understanding all around, I think that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah,
you totally see that. Like I had a patient of mine who, I mean, you see it if you ever on like a bus or in the park or like, you know, and you just see people talking to themselves. And like I had a patient who, he'd always be talking to himself on the buses, you know. He'd like ride the buses.
Right.
That was like that was his thing. And he'd talk to the voices because they were the only, you know, it was this really sad thing when I would say to him, "Oh, do you want me to increase the meds to quieten the voices?" And he'd say to me, "Nah, some of them are nice and also they keep me company." You know, because no one else does. Like everyone else has left him, and when he gets on a bus, he's that bloke on the top deck of the bus where he's talking to his voices, and everyone's come down to the bottom deck because they're so fearful of him. And like I'll try and refer him to like I tried to refer him to this garden community thing because he used to be a gardener before he was unwell, and like they were like buzzing about, "Oh yeah, no, we love volunteers, we love this, that, and the other." And then she asked where I was calling from, and I had said this psychiatric hospital. And then she was like, And then she was like asking his diagnosis, and I told her his diagnosis was schizophrenia, and she was like, right, will he be safe around the general public? You know, all of that sort of nonsense coming out, you know. So, people still have these really unhelpful misconceptions about the dangerousness of people that hear voices and that have odd ideas when, as I say, they're really not. They're massively over-exaggerated.
Yeah. But this is it. This is why we have to keep pushing on. Like the work you're doing is so important. You know, it might seem, you know, like just a small thing, but it will lead to a bigger thing, I'm sure. Absolutely, if we just keep pushing on and keep having the conversations. You know, because now having the conversation with you now, I have more clarity around this subject, which I didn't have before. I just, you know, paranoid schizophrenic, go, oh, well, they're going to just go and, like you said, chop heads off, and they're going to go off on some sort of killing spree. And that's just what's been put into my head through films and whatever else. So, and hopefully people listen to this, well, then again, they'll have a bit more clarity surrounding it as well. Which is a great thing. That would be good to try and get that across. Because I know... Yeah, totally. Because I think that's the other thing. Like, you know, I know you, a colleague of mine, Shaham Das. You've spoke to him, haven't you? Yes. Yeah,
he's a forensic psychiatrist. Yeah, and he's a forensic psychiatrist, and it's like, we are very, this true crime genre and like the forensic side of things. We are very fascinated by that. But that's like, we're flooded with that. That's the main, it's like his sort of stuff, which is not saying anything, it's not his fault, but like, it's almost like the more forensic psychiatry stuff gets pushed, it's like the more, obviously, when that's all we get exposed to as people, we just presume, oh, they're all like that. You know, whereas those are just the minority of people that do horrendous things in the context of being unwell. And so obviously we're going to generalise if that's the only people we ever have exposure of with a diagnosis like schizophrenia, you know?
Yeah. Do you find, talking about that actually, about Shaham, and I think I said this to him as well. Do you find yourself just reading people all the time? Just kind of, just in general, kind of like, oh yeah, I see what's going on here. Like just on a, on a sub sort of conscious level, you kind of, because people give away so much without actually saying anything.
Well, this is the thing though, Rich. This is like where people seem to think I have skills that I don't, where they think right. I can't. Like people always say that, like at parties, like sometimes I would literally make up other jobs because if I told people my job, they'd just leave so quickly because they thought I could read their mind. So I was telling people I once told someone I was a soldier, and like another time I was like just had a bit of fun with these made up jobs, and literally you can pick any other job and you'll probably hold them. You could say you work in an abattoir or anything, you'll probably keep them longer than if you say you're a psychiatrist. You tell people you're a psychiatrist, they run a mile. Because they think I can see into their soul and know all these things they don't even know about them. If only,
When I've had it on stage and you say to someone like, what do? You know, that tired bullshit thing that we all do. Oh, what's your name? What do you do? And the amount of times I've had, I'm a psychiatrist or I'm a psychoanalyst or that. And I always make a joke, well, I'm not going to talk to you because not only do you know what's going on up here, or not only do you know why I do this, like my driving thing, so I'm not going to talk to you because I don't want you to unpick this. And and we do straight away. We're like, you've got superhuman strength and superhuman powers. Yeah,
and they go along with it.
You can see straight through us.
Yeah. They go along with it because it's semi-flattering. It's semi-flattering that people think we could possibly be that powerful, But the reality is that, unfortunately, no.
You'd be exhausted every interaction you ever had, and you're listening to them, but you're on a subconscious level. You're reading them, and reading between every single line. You'd be fucked. You just never. Yeah. It'd be like a psychic who goes out and all they hear is people trying to get in touch with relatives. It just be, exactly. Can you fuck off for a bit?
Yeah. Well, that is what always happens. That is what always happens to me when I've got a joke about it. Even when I'll get in a black cab and the guy will go, I'll tell him my job and he'll go, go on then, what am I thinking? Like people always think.
You're a clairvoyant, or you're a
exactly. You
can read minds. But I think you mentioned that when you said the difference between a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist and a psychic, and I think it's just intuition rather than having any sort of skill. I think having been a lying sack of shit when I was growing up, when I was a child, when I was younger. I was always mucking around. I was in relationships and I'd cheat on people because I hadn't sorted my shit out. And now when I hear people talking, I'm like, oh yeah, you're up to no good, mate. I know exactly what that is. You know what I mean? You can kind of pick up on stuff. But I think that's more because there's more lived experience rather than having any kind of, any kind of psychic power.
Yeah. Oh no, you don't get taught. How do you even teach that? Yeah, you don't. Psychiatrists don't get taught that. Psychiatrists, it's very much just kind of rote learning, really, and this symptom plus that symptom plus the other symptom equals this diagnosis, and it's not too clever, really, to be honest. It's just, it's just that. Yeah.
Have you ever had someone like telling you stuff, and you're like, "Fuck, this is pretty heavy, actually." No, I don't need I don't need patient. It's patient patient doctor confidentiality. But there must have been a time where you go, "Fuck, all right."
Oh yeah. Oh mate, it's all like that though. It's all like that because to meet the threshold to see someone like me in the NHS is so high now. You've got to be at that level and then some to even see an NHS psychiatrist now. Do you know what I mean? You're not going to get through the door with anything mild. So it's all like that. And then there is the, it's all like that. And then obviously that can impact on you because, this stuff can stick if you're just spending your day job around human misery. That does inevitably stick at some point, just a little bit, And that's why psychiatrists have got notoriously bad mental health themselves. And it's why, it's like when I first started as a psychiatrist, my boss was like having my first supervision session, and it was boiling in her office on the psych ward. And I was like, can we open a window to get some air? And she was like, oh, they don't open up here. And I was like, what, even the psychiatrist's offices? And she said, especially in the psychiatrist's offices.
What?
Because psychiatrists have like the worst. Psychiatrists are notorious for killing themselves and having really bad mental health and substance misuse problems. But of course they would be. Partly because, you know, they're usually quite complicated people that are attracted to that job in the first place. And then obviously being around all this stuff doesn't help much either, usually.
I know exactly what you mean. On another level, where I used to work in a care home, and so you saw what happens to people at the end. And that really affected me. I used to take it home and I was talking to when I was with the mother of my kids, and I'd come in and she was like, how was it? I'm like, it just makes me sad that's where most people end up. You get to a point where you can't fend for yourself. You can't even take care of yourself. And you just kind of just waiting to just finish. And that really affected me on that level. So if you're talking to people about really heavy subjects, it would take, again, you'd have to be superhuman to not have any of that, you know, go inside you at some point.
Sure. So that's why you've just got to cling to the, you know, the small victories that you get, you know. People, you know, some people do get better, and like there aren't really any cures for it. There's no cure for schizophrenia, for example. You just kind of have relapses and remissions, and you just kind of have good times and not good times. And you've just got to try and celebrate the good times and try and but it can be hard, because it's like, you know, when I used to work in medicine and surgery and stuff, like you'd be having great outcomes and you'd be getting lots of thank you cards from patients and chocolates and stuff, whereas you don't really get that in psychiatry because, you know, the outcomes aren't there yet. I mean,
no, I suppose it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? You're helping people cope with what's happening rather than curing it, like you just said.
Yeah. So it's harder to find job satisfaction sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
Harder to feel that you're making a real difference. If you go into medicine to make a difference, and it's kind of hilarious when I think about it now, when I went for my medical school interview and they were kind of on about, how do you want to change the world? And then I think about where we're at sometimes in psychiatry now, where we've got certain patients and they're so disabled that we're just celebrating the fact that they went to the shop to get some milk or whatever. And that's a victory for us, you know, and you're thinking, bloody hell, it's not quite saving the world, but it is in a way, you know. You're just trying to get people to live as normal a life in society as they can, I guess. But we still need still a long way to go. So when people think we're super enlightened compared to, this is the hilarious thing that people always seem to think, like, oh, we know everything now, we're super enlightened, like those guys in the past when they were doing lobotomies and, you know, shock therapy and, you know, all this stuff, all these barbaric things, they didn't have a clue. But then inevitably in the history of psychiatry, like, you need to remember, at that time, everyone thought those were great ideas, you know? Everyone thought they worked. Like, the guy who created the lobotomy got a Nobel Prize in medicine at the time. So,
wow.
Like, it'd be very naive to think that my grandkids won't be shaking their heads at the things that I've been doing as a psychiatrist, you know? They're going to be having exactly the same thoughts, I'm pretty sure.
But this is it, isn't it? There's no, as you say, with humanity, there's just this ongoing, there's just the journey. There isn't really the destination, because we're always discovering and then debunking and then changing. And that just goes on and on until humans won't be here anymore. We'll be on to the next species or whatever else comes along. But I, for one, am glad that people like you exist, and because you've given me so much clarity today. And I've really enjoyed talking to you. So let's finish. When's the book coming out? Do you know yet, or is that still ongoing because it's at the printers? You've got to wait because it's at the.
Well, I've got to get it past my family first. But got to get it past my family. But the current plan is my publishers want it to come out spring 2024.
Okay.
Yeah, so look out for it then. It's going to be called You Don't Have to Be Mad to Work Here. And that's published by Penguin. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Yeah. And
you're going to be in Edinburgh this year?
Yeah, I'm doing a show also called You Don't Have to Be Mad to Work Here at Pleasance Courtyard at 4:30 for our August. So, yeah, hopefully that'll be good as well.
Excellent. I'm sure it will be. I'm sure you'll smash it. You're a very talented man. I'm not just blowing smoke up your aarse. I think you're great.
Thanks, mate.
And thank you for
come
coming
on.
on.
You might enjoy it. It's literally same room, same time that Rich had. I thought, so you'd be super welcome.
Excellent. That's a perfect little room. Yeah, excellent.
Nice room.
I mean, little.
It?
I mean, I don't mean. Oh, it's only 2 seats. It's a lovely room.
It's good, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's an excellent room. Perfect. But this has been great. And where can we find you on all the socials?
I'm Dr. DOCTOR _ Benji. Yeah, on Twitter, and then Dr. _ Benji's on Instagram. Yeah, those are the main places, really. Yeah.
Fantastic. Benji, thank you so much, mate. It's been an absolute joy to speak to you. And we'll do this again next week, everybody. This has been Insane in the Membrane. I've been Rich Wilson. This has been Benji Waterstones. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Rich. Cheerio.